Song Wan loves Fu Yanchuan, disregarding everything and losing herself, but Fu Yanchuan hates her, wishing she could disappear into this world. She thought she could definitely warm up his heart until the day his white moonlight returned to China after leaving behind a divorce agreement. He attended various banquets with a high-profile white moonlight. Song Wan's heart finally died. She hit her pregnant belly and left his world. The man who has always hated her to the bone has gone crazy, searching for her all over the world. When we met again, she was the youngest queen, holding the hand of another man and smiling delicately. He blushed and rushed forward like a madman. Song Wan, you stole my heart. What should you use for it? Chapter 1. Fu Yanchuan, let's divorce. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The midnight bell rang, and Song Wan finally stood up from the sofa. She walked into the restaurant and poured all the cold dishes on the table into the trash can. She knew that Fu Yanchuan would not come back tonight. 3 months ago, he was photographed by paparazzi kissing the currently popular little flower Su Yuro. He did not respond directly until more intimate photos of the two were released, and rumors spread everywhere. Fu was furious and ordered them not to come back, but he rebelled against him for the first time. He attended various banquets and grand gatherings with that little flower, which made her stand out, and it was because of her that she began to stay up all night. As his hidden wife, Song Wan cannot cry or cause trouble. She comes from a poor background, and her father is addicted to gambling. He often doesn't go home, and every time he comes back, he brings back a bunch of debts. Her mother Shuang is a weak and hardworking rural woman. The biggest resistance she has ever made in her life was to escape with her when she was subjected to domestic violence. She worked hard to earn money for her education, and later was introduced to become a caregiver for Grandma Fu Yanchuan by chance. Shuang has a gentle and careful personality, and the old man likes her very much. Coincidentally, Fu Yanchuan's parents were divorcing at that time, so the old man took her to Fu Yunting, Fu Yanchuan's father. Fu Yunting was eager to get rid of this marriage because of Fu Yanchuan's mother's infidelity. He saw that the old man liked her and learned that she was alone with her daughter. Then I had the idea of marrying her, each taking what they needed. At first, Shuang was unwilling, but due to financial constraints, she had no choice. So, the two got married and moved into the Fu family. In front of her, she was Mrs. Fu with unlimited glory, but behind her, she was seen as a mistress in the eyes of others. Fu Yanchuan believed that she had destroyed his originally beautiful family, so he hated their mother and daughter to the bone. Later, Shuang fell seriously ill and begged Fu Yunting on his deathbed to let Song Wan marry Fu Yanchuan, giving her a lifetime of peace. At that time, Fu Yunting happened to find out that Fu Yanchuan's girlfriend had ulterior motives in approaching him, so he made up his mind and agreed. Song Wan went from his sister to his wife again. The people in the Fu family's old mansion despised the mother and daughter very much, and Fu Yanchuan hated her to the bone. But he didn't know that Song Wan was completely unaware of all of this at the time. After marriage, life is naturally very unpleasant. Fu Yanchuan hates her extremely, hates her mother's appearance for destroying his parents' marriage, and even hates her for destroying his originally beautiful feelings. Whenever he gets drunk, he will tightly grip her throat and force her to ask why she is so shameless. Why, Song Wan doesn't know either. She only knew that she had fallen in love with him since the day she came to the Fu family. But he is the proud son of heaven, while she, humble as mud, has always been careful to keep this love hidden in her heart. But unexpectedly, it was discovered by my mother. Song Wan looked at the empty living room and recalled Fu Yanchuan's questioning in her mind. She gave a bitter smile and got up to walk upstairs. Suddenly, her phone rang. She was overjoyed and quickly took out her phone from her pocket, but when she saw the message, she froze in place. That's an unfamiliar number, but she knows who she is. She shook her hands and opened it, which was a photo of a pregnancy test stick. 2 bars. She seemed to have forgotten to breathe, but tears kept falling like broken beads. Su Yuro is pregnant. She thought of how few days Fu Yanchuan had gone home in the past 3 months, and it was self-evident who he was with. Song Wan stared at the photo intently, her eyes turning red as she couldn't help but shed tears. She knew that from this moment on, there was no possibility for her and Fu Yanchuan. She remembered their past and the extreme disgust Fu Yanchuan had towards her, and gave a bitter smile. 12 years have passed, and she finally can't move anymore. Now, perhaps it's really time to let him go free. She opened her address book, found his name, and typed with trembling hands. Fu Yanchuan, let's get divorced. Chapter 2. What if I said, I have regretted falling in love with you? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Wan squatted on the stairs, sleepless all night. The first ray of sunlight in the morning shone in, and she slowly opened her eyes. Suddenly, the sound of password input rang in the quiet living room. She was a bit dazed until the sound of the door rang, and then she stared blankly at the door. A tall and handsome man walked in from outside, his suit in his hand, his shirt a bit messy, and there seemed to be lipstick marks on the collar. Song Wan can imagine how crazy he was with Su Yuro last night. Fu Yanchuan saw Song Wan squatting on the ground, his eyebrows furrowed slightly, and his eyes were filled with undisguised disgust. What are you causing so much trouble early in the morning? Song Wan thought she was numb, but she was still severely stabbed. She knew that he thought she was using the bitter meat trick again. She supported the wall, wanting to stand up, but her legs, which had been squatting all night, were already numb. She quickly fell heavily back to the original position. The man not far away frowned even tighter and was about to step forward when he suddenly lifted his head. Under the morning sunlight, her face was almost transparent white, but her eyes were red and oozing. She looked at him with immense calmness, and suddenly a smile on her lips seemed to be relieved. Fu Yanchuan, let's get divorced. She didn't know why he never mentioned the messages she sent after he came back. Instead of being reluctant, she believed more that he had already blacklisted her number. As if afraid that he might not hear clearly, she repeated it again. Fu Yanchuan, let's get divorced, I'll set you free. This time, she finally stood up against the wall and calmly looked at the man in the distance, without any sadness or joy. Fu Yanchuan only felt that he had heard a joke. He walked over quickly and grabbed her chin with his big palm. Why, seeing that the bitter meat trick is useless, you're starting to retreat and make progress again. Isn't that what that woman taught you again? You mother and daughter are indeed equally cheap. Don't scold my mother. Upon hearing him insulting his mother, Song Wan finally felt emotional. She reached out her hand and pushed him away heavily. Don't scold my mother. She spoke with crimson eyes, word for word. Her eyes seemed to be filled with tears, but she held them back and didn't let them fall. Fu Yanchuan was angered by her, and he reached out to pull her in and then grabbed her throat. Her neck was so slender that it looked like it would break with a pinch. He slowly exerted force and watched her face turn red. Your mother destroys other people's families, and you destroy others' emotions. It's true that both mother and daughter are so despicable. Song Wan's face turned red and she struggled desperately, but her breathing became thinner and thinner, as if she had seen her mother whom she couldn't even dream of in her dreams. Are you dying? She is exhausted, she really misses her. She slowly closed her eyes and her hands stopped struggling, but unexpectedly, the person in front of her suddenly let go of her, and her body fell heavily to the ground, making a muffled sound. She kept coughing and her face turned red and white. The man crouched down and reached out to hook her chin. It's not easy to want to die. I want you to spend your whole life to redeem yourself and regret the decision you made. Song Wan looked at him, and a drop of clear tears suddenly fell. Fu Yanchuan, what if I say, I have already regretted it? Regret falling in love with you, and even more regret choosing to marry you. The man looked at her in this way, but her pupils shrank slightly. At this moment, there was no love in her eyes, only a desire for liberation. A strange emotion quietly rose from his heart, and before he could discern what it was, he heard a familiar ringing of his phone. He watched as Song Wan took out his phone from his pocket, which was the one Fu Yanting had bought for her when she first arrived at the Fu family. This phone is already outdated and its various functions are no longer keeping up with the times, but she still regards it as a treasure. Song Wan was lost in thought and didn't notice his gaze. She just reached out and pressed the answer button. Her phone had severe sound leakage, and even without hands-free, Fu Yanchuan could hear it clearly. "Sister, Dad owes a lot of money outside, and those who are hiding outside dare not go home. Those creditors have just come home and smashed everything. They also said that if they don't pay back the money, they will kill my hand. Help me, sister." Chapter 3. Requires me to lend you money, which is not impossible, but... You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At this moment, Song Wan felt her blood constantly surging upwards, and her head was dizzy, almost unable to stand steadily. Song Hui actually went gambling again, and this time it also implicated Song Muse. She couldn't remember how many times her mother wiped his buttocks for him while she was alive. He repeatedly asked her for money under the guise of Song Muse's upbringing, but she knew she was guilty of her young son who stayed in her hometown. She could only compromise time and time again, to the extent that she appeared to be a wealthy lady, but she was very poor. For the last time, Song Hui knelt in front of her hospital bed and promised that he would never gamble again. In the 3 years after his mother's death, Song Wan had never heard of him gambling again. She thought he was truly repentant, but she didn't expect. She sneered, "It's really impossible for a dog to change its habit of eating shit." Song Muse's crying echoed through the living room, and she only felt a headache. "How much money does he owe them?" The boy kept sobbing, obviously afraid to the extreme. "They said Dad borrowed 3 million from them, but we don't have that much money to repay. Sister, help me figure out a way. I'm really scared. They said they will come back tomorrow, and if I dare to run away, I'll chase them to my school. Sister, what should I do?" Song Muse is Song Wan's biological younger brother. Due to Song Hui's extreme preference for sons over daughters, he would either hit or curse Song Wan when he was young. Therefore, when his mother decided to divorce her, she only took her away. She thought Song Hui wouldn't treat his only son unfairly, but she didn't expect that he had encountered something and pushed him out, but she became a shrinking turtle. All her savings now are only around 200,000 yuan, which is far from enough. She was in distress when a soft hiss came from behind. "The people in your family are really eye-opening to me." At this moment, Song Wan felt a burning sensation on her face. She was about to turn her head to argue when the person on the other end of the phone seemed to suddenly grab a life-saving straw. "Brother-in-law, is that you? Can you help me, just this time? I beg you." The boy's pleading voice seemed to slap Song Wan heavily on the face. She quickly hung up the phone, but no longer had the courage to turn around. A few minutes ago, she still had the courage and confidence to start over on her own, but now she felt like she was weighing down a big mountain, unable to lift her head and catch her breath. Until she heard footsteps coming from behind, she finally turned her head as if she were dead. "Fu Yanchuan, can you?" The man's lips curved into a mocking smile, and he looked at her with a gaze that made Song Wan feel ashamed. "But in the face of my younger brother's safety, dignity is nothing." She gathered her courage and looked at him. "Fu Yanchuan, can you lend me some money? I will definitely repay you as soon as possible." Song Wan's eyes were filled with begging and anticipation, while Fu Yanchuan sneered and lifted her chin. "When your mother begged my dad to let me marry you back then, was it like you, so lowly?" Song Wan's eyes were swollen and painful. Just as he was about to erupt, Fu Yanchuan increased the strength in his hands. "It's not impossible for me to lend you money as a married couple, but..." Song Wan's eyes lit up and she grabbed his sleeve with both hands. "I can promise you anything." Fu Yanchuan pushed her hand away and patted it with disgust. Euro is pregnant and lacks someone to take care of. I think you are very suitable. You can help me take care of her until she gives birth. Chapter 4. Fu Yanchuan, you are so ruthless. You are listening at novel full.audio. The man's tone was plain, as if talking about something insignificant, but it made Song Wan feel that her heart had been cut open and blood was trickling out. He is really ruthless. Fu Yanchuan sneered when he saw her not speaking. Not willing. Then your younger brother. Song Wan lowered her eyelashes, concealed the pain, and then forcefully opened it. I am willing. She stumbled upstairs, wanting to escape from this place, to escape from him. But the man caught up. Do you think I would soften my heart by making myself look like I'm dying? Song Wan, you're really despicable, Mr. Fu. You've said this sentence countless times. So when will you give me the money? She seemed completely numb, putting a thick layer of outer shell on herself, trying to make herself look invincible. Upon hearing her belittle himself like this, Fu Yanchuan felt a hint of displeasure in his heart. He sneered coldly, it's good if you know. Song Wan didn't speak, just extended his hand. Fu Yanchuan sneered and quickly walked to the study. After writing the check, he threw it to her. The check brushed over Song Wan's face, and she felt as if she had been slapped hard again. She carefully collected it and then looked at him again. I'm serious about the divorce. Miss Su is pregnant now, and you don't want your child to become an illegitimate child, do you? On Dad's side. I'll go talk about it. Upon hearing her mention of divorce again, Fu Yanchuan's heart was filled with an inexplicable anger. He quickly approached her, gripping her thin shoulders with both hands. Don't think I don't know what you're up to. You know they're all towards you, so give me a move to make progress by retreating. Don't dream about it. He didn't even know where his anger came from, he just heard her mention divorce time and time again, and his desperate expression made him feel very glaring. It was clearly their mother and daughter who carefully designed it, but now they want to disguise themselves as victims, which is extremely shameless. Song Wan's shoulder was sore from his grip, and she reached out to break free from him, but couldn't push it at all. The man slowly bent down, and a scorching breath sprayed onto her face. She instinctively wanted to hide, but he grabbed her chin and couldn't move. As she watched him get closer and closer, their lips almost pressed against each other, she desperately closed her eyes. Until his mocking voice rang in his ear. Song Wan, you wouldn't think I was just going to kiss you, would you? Song Wan dared not answer and did not want to. She was really dazed just now. She knew very well her lips curved into a bitter smile, but she didn't notice the man's ugly expression. He just had a real urge to kiss. He looked down at her, the girl had a beautiful face, fair skin, and big eyes that seemed to speak, but often filled with tears. The small face that used to carry baby fat has now become pointed, and although it looks exquisite and beautiful, it always seems to carry a bit of sadness. He remembered Fu Yanting repeatedly saying in his ear that if he wanted to treat her better, he would never look down on her. But he didn't know when she had become so thin. He remembered the day she first arrived at the Fu family, when a small person timidly followed behind Shuang, her eyes filled with fear. At that time, she was also like this, thin and small, always timidly calling her brother. Even if he never responds. Even though he has always disliked her. His consciousness returned and his hands relaxed. Song Wan was free and ran towards his room, as if he were something terrifying. He was about to catch up subconsciously when his phone in his suit pocket suddenly rang. He took out his phone, glanced at the caller ID, and frowned slightly. Euro, what's wrong? The woman's crying voice came from the other end. Yanchuan, I just fell and now my stomach hurts so much. Come over quickly. Do you still need to go back in chapter 5? You are listening at novel full.audio. When Song Wan changed his clothes and came out of the room, Fu Yanchuan had already left. She just heard him call and knew that he was looking for Su Euro again. She concealed her inner bitterness and went out with her bag. She took a taxi to the high-speed railway station and bought a ticket for the nearest high-speed train to Yuncheng. She lived in that place for 10 years, which was like a nightmare. Every time Song Hui loses a card, he goes to get drunk and hits her when he gets drunk. He said it was all because she was a girl and brought bad luck to his family, that he lost time and time again. My mother couldn't protect her and could only endure his tyranny with her. Until that time, she finally decided to take her away from that home. She once swore never to go back again. At this moment, as she looked at those two words, she felt that her slightly revived heart had returned to a dead silence. 3 million, how can she repay him? She thought of taking care of Su Euro next, so she had to take advantage of her free time to do some part-time work. Quickly, she boarded the high-speed train and slowly closed her eyes, afraid to think about what was going to happen next. 2 hours later, the high-speed train arrived in Yuncheng, and she rented a car and went directly to the village where the Song family was located. When she stood outside the 2-story building, she felt as if she had passed away. She slowly walked forward and pushed open the door that had not been pushed open for a long time. The house was in a mess, with tables, chairs, and benches scattered all over the ground, and even the TV was smashed. She stood in place, searching for Song Mu's figure, and finally saw the young man curled up in the corner, trembling all over. She slowly walked over and called out his name. The young man suddenly looked up and, when he saw it was her, quickly rushed over and hugged her. "Sister, you've finally come back. I'm really scared, just come back." Song Wan let him hold him and listened to him cry for a long time before pulling him up. "Give me the creditor's phone number, and I'll tell them." Song Muse quickly took out his phone from his pocket and found a number to show her. Song Wan dialed the phone and soon connected. "Kid, do you know where your father is? I advise you. Song Hui owes you money, I'll pay it back. I'm at the Song family right now." Song Wan's voice was incredibly calm, but her hands were stuck in the flesh where no one saw her. This place suffocated her and she didn't want to stay any longer. The person over there laughed and said, "Wait, we'll come now. If you dare to play with us, we'll kill that kid." After hanging up the phone, Song Wan returned his phone to Song Muse and patted the dust on his body. "Don't be afraid." The young man couldn't help but shed tears again, and Song Wan wiped away his tears. "Don't cry, the more you cry, the more others will bully you. In the future, when your sister is not by your side, you must learn to be strong. When you grow up and get into college, leave here." The boy kept nodding, but still held on to her hand tightly. In no time, the creditor arrived. They rudely kicked open the door and squinted their eyes excitedly when they saw Song Wan. "Are you Song Hui's daughter? You've grown so big, and you're still so beautiful." Song Wan didn't want to say much to them. "Here's the IOU, I'll repay you the money he owes, and this matter will be settled." The leader smiled and then took the promissory note from the person behind her, handing it to her. Song Wan looked carefully and found that there was indeed Song Hui's signature and fingerprint on it. She put away the promissory note, then took out the check from her bag and handed it to them. The person glanced at the check and then collected it. "Indeed, she is a wealthy young lady, refreshing." After speaking, they were about to turn around and leave, but Song Wan stopped them. "Ladies and gentlemen, could you please do me a little favor?" The person looked at her and said, "What do you want us to do for you?" The girl's calm face suddenly showed a deep hatred. "If he goes gambling again next time, could you please help me break his leg?" The person's face showed a hint of playfulness. "It's rare to be so cruel to my biological father. I'll take care of you." Song Wan politely thanked them and then watched them leave. Song Muse was frightened and took Song Wan's hand. "Sister, after all, he is our father. You did this. Song Wan turned her head and comforted, I just made them scare him, don't be afraid. The young man was half believing and half doubting. Song Wan pulled him out of the ruins and then took out all the cash on his body. Starting from today, you will move to school and don't come back unless there is anything important. The most important thing for you now is to take the college entrance exam, okay? The young man had red eyes, nodded, and looked at her with a reluctant expression. Sister, what about you? Are you going back? Song Wan looked up at the sky, and a bitter smile slowly appeared at the corner of her mouth. Of course I have to go back. Go back and cross the tribulation that belongs to her. Chapter 6, Wan Wan, have you encountered any difficulties? You are listening at Novel Full.audio. When Song Wan returned home, it was already 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Her stomach, which had not eaten all day, was now feeling a faint pain. She put down her bag and planned to go to the kitchen to make something for herself. She took out tomatoes and eggs from the refrigerator, intending to make a simple tomato egg noodle dish. It's already dark outside, and the spacious villa is empty. You can hear her breathing quietly. Fu Yanchuan has not returned yet. She didn't let herself think about what he would be doing at this moment anymore, just worrying about how to repay that 3 million. Song Wan is currently working as a music teacher in a primary school. Her salary is not high, but she excels in being relaxed and having a good working atmosphere. In private, she formed a band with several friends from college, which is not very well known and can receive several commercial performances every month. But this is far from enough. Su Yuro is now pregnant, and she must save enough money as soon as possible to repay Fu Yanchuan and then divorce him. After making up her mind, she called Tang Tang. She is her best friend and also the founder of the band, with some connections in her hands. The phone was quickly connected, and Song Wan heard a lot of noise on the other end of the phone, guessing that she should be in a bar. Wan Wan, what's wrong? Tang Tang's voice was carefree, but it inexplicably reassured Song Wan. When she heard the other end quiet down, she took a deep breath. Tang Tang, could you help me with some more commercial performances? As soon as Tang Tang heard her voice, he sensed something was wrong. Wan Wan, have you encountered any difficulties? At such times, the concern of friends is the most touching. Song Wan suppressed the urge to cry and forced a smile, saying, No, I just want to make more money. Tang Tang knew she didn't want to say much, so he didn't ask further. I know a bar owner who happens to be missing a resident singer. Would you like to? Yes, thank you Tang Tang. Tang Tang sighed helplessly, then I'll push your WeChat to him and you can contact him specifically. I know him very well and he won't bully you. She actually wanted to ask a lot more questions, but she was afraid of arousing her sadness, so she had to give up. After hanging up the phone, Song Wan received a reminder on WeChat to add friends. She quickly nodded in agreement, then quickly ate the noodles in the bowl and washed it. At this point, the bar owner briefly greeted her and gave her specific working hours and salary benefits. Song Wan looked at it and thought there was no problem, so she agreed. Upon receiving such an opportunity, she breathed a slight sigh of relief in her heart, and then called Song Muse to find out that he had returned to school, which made her feel at ease. Last night she stayed up all night, and today she has been running around all day. Her body is exhausted and she plans to go upstairs and have a good sleep. Just as she took a step forward, she heard the sound of the door being unlocked from the door again. She guessed who it was and was surprised that he came back so early today without turning around. But the person who came seemed to be filled with anger. As soon as she took a few steps up, he quickly caught up with her and grabbed her arm, dragging her into the living room. His strength was too strong, and Song Wan couldn't stand firm for a moment, falling heavily on the floor. Her legs quickly turned black, and her knees also hurt. She propped her hands on the floor, wanting to stand up, but saw the man suddenly squatting down. The next second, her chin was grabbed. Song Wan, you really have a snake and scorpion heart. I didn't misread you. Chapter 7. Fu Yanchuan, I beg you, don't treat me like that. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Wan hissed in pain, and her small face was even whiter without a trace of blood. Her head was dizzy and painful, and bruises could be seen everywhere on her legs. She looked at the angry man in front of her, but had no strength to struggle. She grinned her pale lips and gave a bitter smile. Even if it's death, let me understand. Tell me, what did I do this time? Fu Yanchuan saw that she was still pretending to be foolish, and the strength in her hands increased slightly. I just appeared in the hospital with my front foot, and my dad's back foot arrived. Can you tell me it wasn't you who reported it? Song Wan was very shocked. Did Fu Yanting already know about Su Yuro's pregnancy? Seeing her not speaking, Fu Yanchuan thought she was feeling guilty, and her anger intensified. I'll tell you, if anything happens to Yuro, I won't let you go. Song Wan's chin was sore from his grip, and she reached out to try to break his hand, but he clenched it even tighter. She was exhausted both physically and mentally, and for the first time, she felt a sense of despair towards this marriage and towards him. Fu Yanchuan, have you ever believed me once? Just once. The man only felt that her appearance was very glaring, and he suppressed the strange feeling in his heart, with anger burning in his black eyes. Believe in you, do you also deserve it? Song Wan, you are just like your mother, full of scheming and calculation. People like you never deserve to be trusted. Song Wan's chin was numb with pain, but she still stubbornly lifted her head and said word by word, my mother is not that kind of person. In my heart, she is the best mother in the world. Fu Yanchuan felt like he had heard the funniest joke in the world, your mother ruined someone else's family, causing my mother to fall seriously ill and still living in a nursing home. She is the most vicious woman in the world. After speaking, he looked at her coldly, with hatred pouring out of his eyes. You are the same. Song Wan looked at the man in front of her, he was the person she had loved for 12 years. She respects him, loves him, and wishes to give him everything. After 3 years of marriage, she has been working hard to play the role of a good wife. But he hates her, and he hates her more and more. Fu Yanchuan, believe it or not, I haven't done this before, she said with a pale smile on her lips. The man looked at her with a contemptuous expression and released her chin. Song Wan gained his freedom and was about to flee from his side, but was immediately pulled back by him. The cold smile on the man's face only made her feel extremely scared. Fu Yanting said that he only recognizes you as his daughter. Law, and the descendants of the Fu family must also be born from you. Since that's the case, I might as well comply with his wishes. Song Wan's face turned even whiter and she kept retreating. On her wedding night, he brought her shame, which she still hasn't forgotten. He hates her, even if he has a child, he won't change, so why bother giving birth to a child to suffer? She kept shaking her head, her face filled with fear. Fu Yanchuan, I don't want to, I will go tell my dad, I don't want to have a child, I beg you, don't treat me like that. She held her head in both hands, her body trembling incessantly, and Fu Yanchuan felt her fear so truly for the first time. He reached out his hand, but she quickly retreated, her steps unsteady for a moment, and she stumbled and fell towards the ground. A strange emotion arose in the man's heart, and he quickly stepped forward and grabbed her. The girl in front of him was so petite, so thin and weak, restless like a frightened little rabbit. He inexplicably felt an urge to embrace her. He instinctively reached out his hand and saw that she had quickly taken a step back. The man withdrew his hand and showed a mocking smile again. You alone are not worthy to have my child. I don't want my child's mother to have such a dirty heart. Chapter 8. Song Wan, you look like a pitiful creature like this. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Wan knew she should breathe a sigh of relief, but her heart still felt a piercing pain. She tried hard to raise a smile, pale and fragile. Thank you very much, Mr. Fu. After speaking, she dragged her tired and painful body slowly upstairs, and finally returned to her room. Fu Yanchuan looked at her back and felt a wave of annoyance in his heart. He remembered the way she had called him earlier, and a hint of mockery curved his lips. Before getting married, she called him brother for a whole 9 years, and no matter how much he expressed disgust towards her, she never changed it. When she first got married, she called him Yanchuan, but he mocked her harshly, saying she didn't have the right to call him that. After that, she kept calling him by his name. Her face seems to have never changed, but the smile on her face is decreasing. He remembers that when she was a child, she didn't like to cry, but now she often has red eyes. He didn't know where the restless emotion in his heart came from, but her back was lingering in his heart. He was about to walk upstairs when suddenly he seemed to have thought of something and walked into the restaurant. There was nothing above the dining table, obviously she didn't leave him dinner. He seemed to suddenly find a reason to question her, walked quickly upstairs, and when he arrived at her room door, he pushed it open. The room was pitch black and quiet as if no one was around. As soon as he turned on the lights, he saw the girl on the sofa not far away. Her petite body curled up together, with a layer of fine sweat on her forehead, and the corners of her mouth wriggling as if she was saying something. Fu Yanchuan inexplicably walked over, and when he reached her, he heard her say, "Please, don't hit me." His pupils contracted slightly, and his gaze fell on her bruised chin and knee. He was about to turn around and leave. Thinking of her appearance just now, he bent down and reached out to her forehead. Unexpectedly hot. He curled a sneer at the corner of his mouth and looked down at her. "Song Wan, you look like a pitiful insect like this." He should be happy and feel happy, because heaven has finally punished her. But looking at her half-dead appearance, he felt extremely glaring. He turned his head and didn't look at her again. 5 minutes later, he returned with antipyretic medication. He dug out one, stuffed it into her mouth, and then fed her water. Song Wan refused to swallow it, so he forcefully grabbed her chin and forced her to swallow it, causing her to cough repeatedly. He felt a wave of irritability in his heart, not understanding why he had to care about the life and death of this woman. As he watched her swallow the medicine, he got up and was about to walk out. Just as he reached the door, her weak voice suddenly sounded from behind. "Fu Yanchuan, is that you?" The only answer to her was the merciless sound of the door closing. As soon as Fu Yanchuan walked to the door, he received a call from Su Yuro. The woman's voice was delicate, as if very aggrieved. "Yanchuan, can you come and accompany me? I'm a bit scared alone." The man glanced at Song Wan's door, his voice devoid of emotion. "The hospital has doctors and nurses, you can find them. But Yuro, don't forget what you promised me." The next morning, Song Wan was pulled up from the sofa by Fu Yanchuan. She had her fever subsided, but her head was still a bit groggy and she had no strength on her body. "Song Wan, don't forget the terms on which I lent you money. Go to the hospital immediately to take care of Yuro." Song Wan naturally dared not forget, as she broke free from his hand and stumbled towards the bathroom. When cold water poured on her face, she suddenly regained some consciousness. Last night, she dreamt of being beaten by Song Huidu when she was a child. She begged for mercy desperately, but couldn't escape. She dared not cry because he would beat her even harder. In a daze, she seemed to see Fu Yanchuan. She called out his name, but only saw his back. She looked at herself in the mirror and gave a bitter smile. Fu Yanchuan hates her to the bone, afraid that he hopes she will die soon. She should not, nor can she have any hope for him anymore. Even in a dream. Chapter 9. His tenderness, except for not treating her. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She simply washed and tied her hair into a ponytail before returning to the room. He hasn't left yet. Are you afraid that she will turn back and not take care of his beloved? She didn't ask a question, just turned around expressionless. Can you go out first? I need to change clothes. The man remained indifferent, obviously unwilling to accommodate her. Song Wan had no choice but to take her clothes to the bathroom for a change. When she changes clothes, the man's patience is about to reach its limit. Song Wan didn't look at his ugly expression, just bypassed him and walked straight downstairs. The man followed behind her and stopped her as she was about to reach the door. Euro hasn't had breakfast yet. Song Wan had no choice but to turn around and return to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Fu Yanchuan looked at her thin figure and suddenly remembered that she used to seem to be busy in the kitchen. After getting married, she politely declined Fu Yanting's offer to arrange servants for them and chose to do everything herself. Knowing that he had a bad stomach, she changed her approach to cooking for him. But the ultimate destination of those meals is often the trash can. He sat on the sofa, listening to the commotion in the kitchen, and casually picked up a financial magazine. Half an hour later, Song Wan came out of the kitchen with a tray in her hand. She glanced at the man on the sofa, hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Do you want to eat?" The man didn't respond, as if he hadn't heard her, but Song Wan knew that he had always despised the food she cooked. She didn't ask any more insightful questions and sat down without hesitation. Suddenly, a shadow fell before her eyes, and then a bowl of wonton in the tray was carried over. She was a bit shocked, but restrained herself from asking any questions. The two of them finished breakfast peacefully, and Song Wan followed him to the hospital. Su Yuro lives in the SVIP ward, located on the top floor of the hospital, which shows the importance Fu Yanchuan attaches to her. She followed him in, and the woman on the hospital bed saw him. She quickly got off the bed and rushed towards him. "Yanchuan, you have finally arrived. I miss you so much." Fu Yanchuan reached out to embrace her and carefully supported her waist. "Why be so reckless? What should I do if I hurt the child in my stomach?" Su Yuro kept acting coquettishly in his arms. "So did I miss you?" Fu Yanchuan let go of her and helped her to sit down on the bed. Only then did she see Song Wan behind Fu Yanchuan. She stood up immediately in shock, obviously quite frightened. "Madam Fu, I really like Yanchuan. Please don't separate us." Song Wan was about to answer when she heard Fu Yanchuan sneer lightly. "What's the young lady? She was brought by me to take care of you. From today until you give birth, she will be on call." Su Yuro reached out to cover her mouth with an incredulous expression on her face. "Yanchuan, isn't that good? Uncle Fu really likes her. If he knew." The man's face darkened slightly. "Don't worry about him." As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Song Wan with impatience on his face. "What are you still waiting for? Did I ask you to be a sculpture?" Song Wan watched their interaction, sourness spreading from her eyes to her heart, and she just wanted to disappear in place. She used to be skeptical about media reports and paparazzi's follow-up. She didn't believe that he could fall in love with anyone besides Chu Qing. Now it seems that she is just deceiving herself. He may fall in love with anyone, but it won't be her. She opened the insulated bucket and handed her the spoon. "Miss Su, let's have breakfast." Su Yuro reached out and took it. Just as she glanced at it, she frowned slightly and looked pitifully at Fu Yanchuan. "Yanchuan, I'm weak all over. Can you feed me?" Have you ever had a crush on Song Wan in Chapter 10? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Wan watched helplessly as Fu Yanchuan sat by the hospital bed and then took the insulated bucket from her hand. He fed Su Yuro spoonfuls by spoonfuls, his expression incredibly gentle, and even thoughtfully asked her if it was hot. Su Yuro was extremely happy. She hugged one of his arms and talked to him about the latest gossip in the entertainment industry. Fu Yanchuan was extremely patient from beginning to end, with a faint smile in her eyes. Song Wan stood on the side, feeling like a complete clown. Her husband, in front of her, takes meticulous care of other women. But she can't cry, she can't make a scene. There will be no wife in this world who has failed more than her. She quietly stepped aside, lowered her head, not looking or listening. But Su Yuro's laughter still penetrated her ears, making her feel harsh and even more desolate. Although she had already made up her mind to divorce him and knew how much they loved each other, seeing this scene with her own eyes, she would still be severely stabbed. Song Wan, you really lack backbone. Not knowing how long it had been, the laughter in her ears stopped. She looked up and saw Fu Yanchuan wiping the soup from Su Yuro's lips. His movements were so careful, and Su Yuro tightly hugged his waist, looking very obedient to people. How two people love each other. Song Wan let out a bitter smile in her heart and was about to shift her gaze, but Su Yuro looked over. Their gaze collided, and Su Yuro had a smile on her face, with a dazzling display in her eyes. "Miss Song, can you peel an apple for me?" The doctor said, "I need to supplement my nutrition now." Her voice was still delicate, her face was even more shy and alluring, and her finger even poked Fu Yanchuan's chest. "It's all your fault, I feel like I've gained weight." The man's lips curved with a smile, and when he turned to look at Song Wan, his smile faded away. "What are you still waiting for? Isn't your mother the most skilled at serving people? She should have taught you too, right?" Song Wan suddenly looked up, her eyes turning red. He was mocking her mother's past experience as a caregiver. She was about to refute, but Su Yuro suddenly trembled and threw herself into Fu Yanchuan's arms. "Yanchuan, Miss Song looks so scary like this. How about I don't want her to take care of me?" The man sneered, "Don't worry about her. With me around, she dare not do anything to you." Su Yuro responded coquettishly, her gaze still cautious towards Song Wan. Song Wan picked up an apple from the table, then picked up a fruit knife and silently squatted next to the trash can to peel it. The ward, which had just been laughing and laughing, suddenly fell silent. Song Wan could guess that they were all watching her at this moment. She must look embarrassed and ridiculous in their hearts at this moment, like a clown. But when she thought of that 3 million debt, she could only bear it. After repaying the money, she and he will have no further relationship. With this thought, her heart finally relaxed for a moment, while the woman on the hospital bed was already somewhat dissatisfied. Fu Yanchuan was just staring at Song Wan all along. She exclaimed, looking at the person on the ground with a guilty expression on her face. "Miss Song, I suddenly don't want to eat apples. Can you help me peel an orange?" Upon hearing this, Song Wan stopped and picked up an orange from the table. She quickly peeled it off and handed it to her. Su Yuro frowned tightly as soon as she ate a petal. "It's so sour." Song Wan looked at her expressionlessly, as if knowing that she would definitely use more tricks in the future. As expected, she looked at the grapes on the table and came up with a plan. "Miss Song, could you help me peel some grapes?" After Song Wan agreed and took the grapes to the bathroom to clean them, she began peeling them one by one. Su Yuro couldn't help but exclaim in surprise as she watched her so skillful movements. "Yanchuan, you're absolutely right. Miss Song is really good at taking care of people. She doesn't look like me at all, she's clumsy." Song Wan paused and only heard the man's light smile. "If you know how to serve people like this, you just need to be responsible for making me happy. You hate." Su Yuro gave him a shy and seductive push. Song Wan never had a moment when she wished she were deaf. He tried hard to pretend that he hadn't heard anything, but his heart was still fiercely cut open, with blood streaming down his spine. Quickly, she peeled a bunch of grapes and placed them on the table. Su Yuro glanced at the crystal-clear grapes on the table and looked at the man in front of her with seductive eyes like silk. "Yanchuan, can you feed me?" With her gaze, Song Wan realized that what was going to happen next was not just about feeding grapes, and quickly turned his back. The playful and flirtatious scene she had imagined did not happen, but she heard a loud bang. She turned her head and saw that the plate holding grapes was heavily thrown onto the table by Fu Yanchuan. Sour to death, who bought the fruit? Go buy it again. Su Yuro was frightened so much that she didn't expect him to suddenly lose her temper. She was about to explain, but she heard him call Song Wan's name. You go and buy again. Su Yuro's face was full of shock, but she saw Song Wan calmly reaching out to him. If you want to buy something, pay first. I don't support credit here. Fu Yanchuan sneered and then took out a card from his wallet and threw it onto her. In the future, Yuro's expenses will be covered by this card. Song Wan readily agreed and turned around to go out. Su Yuro looked at her back, still feeling a bit dazed. She pulled Fu Yanchuan's sleeve and her face turned slightly white. Yanchuan, what's wrong with you? Why are you so angry? The man touched her back and comforted, It's okay, you can lie down and rest for a while. After speaking, he stood up and walked towards the window. When Su Yuro saw him looking out the window, her first reaction was that he was looking at Song Wan. She was a bit unhappy, but she was just too scared by him to act. When Fu Yanchuan turned around, he realized she was sitting on the bed wiping tears. He frowned slightly and walked towards her. Why are you crying? He casually drew a tissue and was about to help her wipe her tears, but she grabbed his hand. The woman looked at him with a tearful expression, her voice still trembling. Yanchuan, to be honest with me, are you angry with me? Do you think I bullied Miss Song? But I did it because I was acting on your behalf. When I thought about it, it was their mother and daughter who destroyed your family, so I. Fu Yanchuan reached out and held her in his arms, with no emotions visible in his black eyes. I know, I'm not angry with you. He just looked at Song Wan's submissive appearance and felt particularly glaring. She is such a scheming woman, yet she must pretend to be such a weak little white rabbit, which only makes him feel extremely ridiculous. He hates her disguise so much that one day, he will definitely tear off her mask and expose her true form, so that Fu Yanting and his grandmother can see her true face. Su Yuro leaned against his embrace, and suddenly, she heard a light and urgent sound of footsteps coming from the door. A flash of light flashed in her eyes. She raised her voice slightly so that people outside could hear her. Yanchuan, Miss Song is so beautiful. You've been together for so many years, have you ever had a crush on her?